Hey, welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks Workshop. I'm Nick Shada and I'm working on making some kayak paddles. Today I'm going to cut down the shafts, cut some scarves on them, taper them, and hopefully glue on the paddle blades. We'll see how far we get. So I have these shaft blanks here. It'd really be good if I had a joiner. I could just clean up one edge and then run them through the table saw, get them right down to where I need them, but I don't have a joiner. I could hand plane them, but right now I don't even have a decent vise. So I'm just gonna run them through the table saw, basically cut them in half. Hopefully that'll establish a fairly straight edge on them, and then I'll cut them to the appropriate width. So I put a thinner blade in my table saw here so I don't end up with the kerf wasting a lot of wood. That gives me a little bit more leeway as far as correcting some of the misalignment in the laminations. So we'll see how it goes. So when I ripped this long shaft down to get two shafts, one of them sprung a little bit. You see they're touching down at the ends, but there's a gap in the middle. And so this one here is a little bit curved. Wood being a natural material can end up with stresses in it that don't appear until everything's all cut up. Not sure this one's really straight enough to make a one-piece paddle. I'll probably end up cutting it in half and then scarfing it back together again and use it for myself. By scarfing it, I can sort of adjust for some of that curvature a little bit, take some of the curvature out. Might still not be straight enough for a customer paddle, but really it's going to be a fine paddle regardless. It'll just look a little wonky, and I'll make a paddle for myself with it. I'm going to make these paddles 210 centimeters long. I find that's a good length for most sea kayaking. Many people will have a paddle that's substantially longer. That just makes it harder to use. The leverage on it is working against you. So I'm just going to lop these off to length. The unfeathered paddles are using one long piece of wood for their shaft. So I'm just going to cut these to length. With the feathered paddles where I have a scarf in the middle, I will use the scarf to determine the length. So first I'm just going to cut off the rough end on each of these, and then we'll measure it to length. I'm going to taper the end of the shaft so it narrows down at the end here, so it's full width up at the butt of the blade and goes down to about the width of the spline in the end of the blade. You don't have to do this. Here's one where I just left it full width the whole way down. It still looks good. I think the taper just kind of looks cool. It's an added step, doesn't change the function of the paddle at all. It's just an aesthetic thing. I have a sled here for the table saw. Goes in here, slides right along like that. I'm going to use this to do some tapering. So I've got a fence that I can adjust on here. I'll use the same sled for my scarves. I can adjust the angle I make the taper on right here. So I want to make a taper that's 16 inches long. So that comes back to here. So I don't want it to cut it all back at the 16-inch mark. So the width of these is about like that. So I'm going to pivot it around there approximately. And out at the tip here, I want to leave the center spline fully in full width, but I want to taper away the Sitka spruce on either side. So out at the end, I want this to taper away to essentially nothing. So looking here, I'm going to place this so it cuts right there. Well, this back here is at that mark. Give it so leave a little bit of the Sitka showing. Inches. These pieces are bowing out a little bit when I cut them off, so I want to make them even on both sides, so I'm just holding it by hand as I get the clamp on, and then the little wedge here keeps it from jumping around. So the scarf's going to be an 8-to-1 scarf, and that means for every inch of width there's going to be 8 inches of length. Scarves can be a variety of different tapers, so I could do a 12-to-1 scarf on here, which would be stronger, but I've used these paddles for a long time, never busted a scarf using an 8-to-1 scarf, so I'm just going to stick with that. So I'm just going to lay it down here parallel to that line. It doesn't need to be perfect. And do the same drill, clamp it and screw it. So with the fence set up to an 8-to-1 scarf, if I put the first shaft in like this with the spine up, and then the other half of the shaft in like this with the spine horizontal, and glued those two pieces together, I've turned the piece 90 degrees. And as a result, when I glue those two pieces together, I'll get a paddle with a 90-degree feather. Not many people want a 90-degree feather these days. Most people want something like 60 degrees or 45 degrees. Some people want even less. In order to accomplish that, I have here a spacer cut at an angle, and this is an angle of 22.5 degrees, which is half of 45. If I put this in here, and now put this piece in, cut this piece like that, and cut the other shaft like that with the spine horizontal, I have subtracted 22.5 degrees from each cut. And as a consequence, I will get a 45-degree feather. So I've taken 90 degrees minus 22 minus another 22, which is 45. So I just want to set up the spacers so they're holding it at that angle. And then when I go to cut it, I'm going to run this end of the piece out to the end of the cut here and then clamp it in place. Then with the other shaft, I will take and flip it cut it the other direction, clamp it in place, and cut that one like that. So it's a pretty simple process. We get that angle by putting these spacers in. So you could do the same thing by angling the saw blade, tilting the blade. Work just as well, no trickier, but I have it worked out with my little guide here. So if I want a right hand feather, I do it like this. If I want a left hand feather, I do it like that. And then it's just a matter of figuring out what angle for that spacer I want in there. So now I'm just going to adjust the clamps so I get it easy to clamp in there. So now I'm just going to adjust the clamps so I get it easy to clamp in there. So by cutting a test scarf, I can figure out how long the scarf ends up being. So when I go to cut the length of the feathered paddles, I will get the right length paddle when I'm all done. So this is about 28 centimeters long. So that means I need to add half of that to each half of the paddle. So if I'm doing a 210 centimeter paddle, each half piece is going to be 105 plus 14. So plus the length, half the length of the scarf. So the length I want each blank is half the length of the paddle plus half the length of the scarf. So that gives me as if it was butted together, plus now this taper added on there. So for a 210, again, for a 210 centimeter paddle, I'll take half of that, 205, and I will add half the length of the scarf, so it's a 28 centimeter scarf, so I'll take 14 centimeters as half the length of the scarf and add that to the 105, so that is 119. So I'll measure this out to 119. So that's right there and right there. And we'll cut off that excess. So now if I clamp these together, you go to get a little weird. We line up the points of the scarf and just try and make it as straight as possible. Put a clamp on that. And we're right at 210. So you see how these aren't quite at 90 degrees. They're at some other weird angle. If the blade comes out this way and on that way on the other end, that'll be at 45 degrees. So that's one set of shafts ready to accept the blades. Now, so I'm just going to write on here 210 at 45 degrees. For my own paddle, I want a 60-degree feather. So I have a 15-degree wedge here. I'll put that in, and that will take 15 off of each for a total of 30. So 90 minus 30 is 60 degrees. So we'll do this one flat. Now comes the really tricky part with the feathered paddle. You want to make it so that angle is less than 90 degrees between one blade and the other. And there's two choices on this. So this happens to be the 60-degree paddle. So one side's 60 degrees, which is 30 degrees less than 90 degrees, and the other side is 30 degrees greater than 90 degrees. So it is possible to put the blades on this such a way that it's feathered at 120 degrees. And we don't want that. That would require over rotating your wrist and making it really uncomfortable. So what you want to do is hold the paddle. You hold your shaft in the way you think you're going to hold it. And remember, the blades are coming out perpendicular to this taper. So I put a little U mark here showing the way the paddle blade is going to curve. So we're going to put a curved paddle blade on this, something like this. So it's curved this way. So it's going to go on here like this. So I'm putting a little U mark showing which way that's going to curve. So we imagine that there, glued to the side of that taper. And then we hold that, and this is a right hand feather, so I'm going to use my right hand and rotate my wrist up. Now at this end, I want the blade to be cupped backwards as well. So again, I've got a little C mark on there, or U mark, showing which way that's going to go. So we want that U facing towards the back, so the power face is facing towards your back. So when I rotate from here with the U mark there facing back, and then I cock my wrist back, I want that U mark on this end to be facing backwards as well. So we get those marked on there. And the best way to do it is just pick it up, clamp it together, just loosely clamp it together like this, and just give it a try. If you're finding you have to over rotate in order to get that U mark in the right direction, you know you got it wrong. The unfeathered paddle is easy. We want to just make sure they're both facing the same direction. So now we've got the marks on all the shafts. Now I want to draw on the curve of the blade. So I'm grabbing that same template I've used all along for marking that curve, and I'm just going to draw that on here. Make sure we're following the same curvature as indicated by our little marks there that we just went and figured out. So I'm holding the tip and the tip right up even. Like that. So make sure they're facing the same direction. So this part above the line is going to be cut off. We don't need to do this now, but it makes it a little bit easier to align the blades if we don't have that material there, and it saves some time when we go to shape the blades. So I'm just going to cut outside that line and get rid of that material. So that's enough for this episode. In the next episode, I'll glue the blades on and start shaping them. I do offer plans for these paddles, which include the profile of the blade in different blade sizes, long, narrow, short, fat, as well as the curvature and details on how to scarf the shaft together. It ends up with a slightly different blade configuration than what I'm showing here. Since I made the plans, I've refined my technique a little bit. What's shown in the plans works really well. It's a nice system. It's a little harder to make. What I'm detailing in this video is a little bit easier, so you could buy the plans and then build it as shown in this series of videos. Offering plans for the paddle and the boats that I build is just one way I finance the videos I'm putting out here on YouTube and Facebook. Another way I finance it is through monetizing the videos. In the interest of that, share these videos, like them. All that makes them more visible, which makes it more likely I'll get better monetization on it. If you really like these videos and you'd like to support them more directly, I have a Patreon page. And you can go there and support me at various levels. Every little bit helps. I really appreciate it. So until the next video, thanks for watching and happy paddling.